Hey guys, welcome back. So today's part 2 on the 7200 watt beacon generator. This is actually a rebranded Generac XL, which is a very well-made machine. This one is about 20 years old, and judging by the looks of it, I would say spent a majority of its life outside. Anyway, this one I didn't purchase. It was sent to me by a subscriber, I think as a challenge. He didn't really say much about it other than it was in non-running condition. So in part 1, I spent a majority of the time getting the engine up and running. And now that it's running well, I could see that there was another problem. And that's that the generator was not making any power. So I took the end cover off the power head, tested the windings with a multimeter, and could not find any faults. So this board here was installed in the power head, and it was damaged severely. It had clearly overloaded, and based on the testing down the power head, I thought if I got this repaired, we should be in good shape. So I sent this board out actually to another YouTuber. His name is Gary, and he made a repair video on this. So I will link to that video up above and down in the description. And once I got it back, I installed it, started the engine, and this transistor right here immediately blew out and the engine went under load, which is not a good sign. Usually when an engine goes under load and there's no load connected, that is a sign of a bad stator. So I broke out the high voltage insulation tester, tested all the windings again at 1,000 volts, and could not find a fault in that power head. So I sent this board out again to be repaired, and also the system board. And Gary made another video on that, so I'll link to those as well. And what he found was that the transistor had blown out on this board. And the system board I sent him as well. I didn't think there was an issue with it because it looked to be in good shape, but he did find issues. One of the pins was broken, and the other two were severely corroded. So he put new pins on and also discovered damage on this board as well. So what happens when one of these pins doesn't make a good connection is that there is a cascade failure and it damages both of the boards. So these now have both been repaired and theoretically should fix the issue. At least that's my hope. So I'm going to get the boards installed. We'll start it up. If it makes power, then we'll continue on and try to make this thing 100%. But if it blows the board again, then I think this is going to be a parts machine. So let me get you set up a little bit better and get going on this. Got the carb topped off with fuel, and I've only hooked up the power control module. It's connected to the DPE winding. The number 2 wire is connected to the outside, and the white wire, which is the positive, is connected to the outer brush. So starting it like this, there will be no voltage regulation. It's just going to go to full power, which should be around 170 volts. So I've also got the multimeter connected in so we can measure that, but the stator, it is disconnected from the control panel. So let's pull that cord and hopefully we see power output without sparks and without that engine going under a load. Thankfully, nothing burned down other than the board. So yeah, I'm glad I didn't plug in that system board, because that system board should still be good, but this board blew out again. And this is technically the third time. I mean, it was blown when I got the generator. I've had it repaired twice, and both times it blew the board out. So yeah, I can't quite put my finger on why this power head is bad. I mean, all the tests are good as far as I can tell, but clearly something is not happy in that power head. So unfortunately, this is a parts machine. So let's get that power head off. We'll get a better look visually and see if we can't determine what is wrong with it. It's fighting me. Just going to get a little bit of PB Blaster in here. It'll help maybe a little to release the ball bearing from the end housing, but there's a lot of corrosion in here, and I'm guessing the ball bearing, that the outer race is also rusted and probably rust jacked in place. So I'll use a puller, try to separate the end housing from the ball bearing, and hope that it releases. Piece of the end housing just broke off, so yeah, this one's gonna be a fight, but no choice but to keep going. Been looking over the stator pretty carefully, and I'm not seeing any signs of a problem. The lacing, it's all intact. None of it's burnt or broken. Same with these zip ties. Nothing is melted. And if you look down the length of the stator, all the paper is intact. Nothing's burnt or melted, and it looks the same way on this side. I guess the only thing that's a little suspicious is the color of the wire on the sides here. But this wire, it is covered in a varnish, and sometimes they use different color varnishes, and the color is very consistent. It does not look like it's burnt. So yeah, this one continues to be a mystery. I unplugged the spark plug because anytime you rotate an engine, you want to make sure there's no chance of it starting. No threads on this one, so I might tap some threads, either use water to build hydraulic pressure to pop it off, or you could also insert a rod to do the same. But in this case, I think I'm going to try the easy thing. We'll put this in most of the way and then strike it a few times with a hammer. And with any luck, it'll pop it off the tapered shaft. Really, the only thing you have to watch out for is that you don't miss and actually hit the rotor and damage it. You know, in this case, I don't know if the rotor or stator are bad, so kind of have to assume they both are. I don't think I can reuse either of them, but still, I'm going to try to not damage it. And actually, I might add a washer right here just to offer a little bit of protection. So hopefully that'll work. Just keep in mind when you do that, you risk damage to the rotor, and you could also bend the bolt depending upon how hard you hit it. Anyway, I'm sure there's a lot of rust on the tapered shaft, so this may not work. Gonna try tapping the threads. Maybe that'll work better. It's about 10.6 millimeters in diameter, so the closest tap I have that should work is a 12 millimeter, 1.75, so let's give that a try. I need to cut a rod down that is a little shorter than where I made that mark. The goal is to get it in such a way that I can screw this in and get a decent amount of threads turned in, probably at least 5 or 6. The issue is I couldn't get the threads down as far as I wanted to. I wanted at least 10 full turns, and I think I only have about 7. So I have a feeling this is going to strip out and not work, but let's give it a try. Stripped out. Nope, that's not going to work. It's already stripped. So, back to plan A. I think I need a bigger hammer. That might be it. I've got the 3 components here in question, and the question in my mind is which one is bad and which one is good? Should I keep anything here? And obviously the board is now bad again, so it's blown 3 times. I think I'm probably going to retire this board. It's been treated pretty poorly. But one thing of interest, the last time this blew, I could clearly see it was the pin on the right on the SCR that heated up, and that is the gate pin. And when I sent this board initially to Gary for repair, he depotted it, sent me a picture, and the trace for that gate pin was completely destroyed. There was actually a hole in the board where that trace should have been. And I think every time this board is blown, it's been related to that gate connection. So, how is the current flowing on there like it is? I don't know, but it can only handle about an amp before you overload the SCR. And in this case, it was getting quite a bit more than that. So now we're left with the stator and the rotor. And the rotor looks good. It tests good. Even the slip rings, I just cleaned them up. They're nice and clean. And the ball bearing is actually good. So I don't think this is the issue. The only thing the rotor does is create a magnetic field. You supply DC in on the brushes, that turns this into an electromagnet, and it spins in the rotor. And it should just spin freely. There shouldn't be any load on the engine, or at least very little. The thing that creates the load is when you pull current out of the stator. The more current you pull, the magnetic field actually builds in the stator, and it opposes the rotation of this rotor. So the more current you pull, the more force is pushing against the rotor, opposing its rotation. And the fact that the engine goes under a heavy load says that there's a lot of current flowing in this stator, which it shouldn't be, because I had the main windings disconnected. So there has to be a short in that stator somewhere. And, it just bugs me that I can't prove it with a multimeter or an insulation tester. So that is the issue here. Visually, things look pretty good, but actually, now that I'm looking at it, that does look burnt. Or maybe it's just epoxy. I don't know. But yeah, long story short, I think it is the stator. The thing I saw earlier, after I pulled this off, I was just poking around, connected to the excitation winding, trying to check for any connection to ground. And initially, I didn't get one, like I'm seeing right now. But intermittently, I would get a connection. It was changing a lot between no connection, and at one point, I actually got a reading of 2 million ohms, which is low. It should still technically work at 2 million ohms, but the fact that it got that low and it was fluctuating so much tells me that there is something touching to ground that shouldn't be, and it's intermittent. So that is most likely why I can't test it and see the issue. Anyway, I think the stator needs to be recycled. I'm going to keep the rotor, and this poor board, I think I'll retire that as well. So I can actually test the rotor pretty easily with this power supply. I've zip tied the brushes to the slip rings, and I'm going to connect negative to the bottom and positive to the top. That's how it should be on this rotor. If you get it backwards, it's not going to destroy the rotor, but it is going to reverse the magnetism, and that will cause an issue with the residual magnetism and most likely will prevent your generator from powering up. So if I get some metal, you can see it doesn't stick. But when I turn this on, I set it to 12.7 volts. We're pulling 1.5 amps, which is normal for this rotor. It should stick. And if I turn the voltage up, of course the magnet will get stronger and things will stick to it. And when I shut it off, magnetism is lost. So I would say there's nothing wrong with that rotor. I've never had to take apart one of these generators before, and now that it's off, I can see the reuse of this engine is going to be difficult on anything but a Generac XL series generator because the bolt pattern for the bell housing, it's not what I normally see. These bolts, they're all uniformly spaced, and on most generators made in the last 20 years, the top two bolts are actually closer together. So although this bell housing is removable, I can't put on another because of the bolt pattern. And also the tapered shaft, it is shorter than I was expecting to see. This engine, this generator was made by Generac when Briggs owned them, and I was hoping the tapered shaft would look more like the ones used on Briggs and Stratton generators, because I do have a couple power heads that would fit that. But yeah, the bell housing, it is too wide, and the tapered shaft is not compatible. So this might sit on a shelf for a while. You know, these engines typically don't blow up, but I would say anything's possible. Anyway, there's not much left to do here other than get the engine off the frame. But before I do that, I do want to make the engine 100%. I did buy an oil filter for it, and I purchased the missing anti-lash spring, which could cause surging without that. So I want to get those two items taken care of. That way, in the future, this will be ready to go when its day comes. This filter's pretty rusty. I don't think it's been changed in a long time. There we go. Maybe. There's one last thing I want to do, which is test the electric start. And I think it's a good time to do that now because the oil filter, I was not able to put any oil in it. So I want to turn the engine over and just fill it up and build some oil pressure. So we'll also test the oil pressure switch, which should be this yellow wire that goes over to the pressure switch on the other side. So if I probe it, right now there's no oil pressure. So if I touch this to ground, we get a connection. But once I crank the engine for a few seconds, the pressure should build and that ground should go away. The terminals are missing on both of these. Actually, this one's broken off and this one's just missing altogether. So it does need new terminals, but I'm not concerned about that right now because this engine, I'm not sure when it's going to be used. So I'll just use some vice grips to hold this to the battery and then turn the engine over. No sparks. And I'm just going to use the test light to visualize this. So right now we have a ground, and the other end of the test light is connected to the positive on the battery. So I'm going to crank the engine. Hopefully that goes out. And there we go. That starter does not sound good. Okay, good. I almost forgot this anti-lash spring. So we'll get that on. It's better to have it with the engine instead of sitting around somewhere and just losing it. Most likely you're supposed to uninstall this blower housing, but you can usually get this out. There we go. I think that's a wrap, guys. I mean, this one, unfortunately, it was a bit of a long shot. I was hoping for the best, given how the rotor and the stator tested, but you can't argue with what was going on. That board and the power head, it was blown out before I got the generator, had it fixed twice, and it blew out twice. So yeah, there's something not right with this power head, but the engine is a very good engine. These are some of the best made. There's very few like this that actually have an oil filter and a pressurized oil system. So these are fairly bulletproof. And I would say it's going to be a while before I find a Generac XL with a blown up engine where I can drop this one in its place. So I am prepping this for long-term storage. And that is a question I get asked a lot as far as how do you store your generator? And there's really two or maybe three important things. If you have a battery, definitely keep a battery tender on it, where it will automatically keep it charged. The fuel is a big issue. It goes bad quickly. So if you keep fuel in your tank, definitely swap it out at least every 6 months, if not more often, and always store the carburetor dry. In this case, there's no drain on the bowl, but I already restarted it and ran it until it stalled out. So the carb is mostly empty, and of course we have fresh oil in it. So the last thing that needs to be done is to pull the plug and spray some fogging oil in there. But I'm out of fogging oil, so I just ordered some. I'll get that put in there before storing it away. And once the fogging oil and the plug are back in, the last thing I do is just pull the engine over until I hit the compression stroke. That way you know the valves are closed, the cylinder is sealed from the atmosphere, and that'll prevent moisture from getting in and rusting up the cylinder and the rings. And of course, the fogging oil is supposed to prevent that as well. But if the valves are closed, then you're a lot less likely to have an issue. Unfortunately, you can't save them all, but someday this will be put to good use. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.